My name is Alara. I am 31 years old. For 4 years, my mother-in-law told everyone who would listen that my bloodline was too thin, my constitution too weak, and my biology too flawed to carry her family's legacy. She said it at country club brunches, she whispered it during holiday dinners, and she heavily implied it every time she handed me the card of another elite fertility specialist. But yesterday afternoon, a heavy, velvet-lined box arrived at my front door containing a rare, custom-blended herbal tea she swore would finally cure my supposed barrenness. I didn't drink it. Instead, in a moment of sheer, exhausted spite, I poured it into the ceramic bowl belonging to her prized $60,000 Afghan hound. Now I am sitting in the blindingly white waiting room of an emergency veterinary clinic. My husband is pacing the floor, his hands pulling at his hair, and I am watching two uniformed police officers walk through the sliding glass doors, their hands resting on their utility belts, walking directly toward the head veterinarian who just ran a toxicology screen on the dog. Before we get into what the vet found, and before I tell you exactly what my mother-in-law put in that tea, I need you to understand that none of this was an accident. The distance between a passive-aggressive comment and a police investigation is actually much shorter than you think. It just requires one person to finally stop swallowing the poison. If you have ever been the outsider in a family that views themselves as royalty, if you have ever sat at a dining table and felt completely invisible while they dissected your flaws disguised as concern, I want you to keep reading. Because the story of how I dismantled an entire dynasty starts long before those police officers walked into the clinic. It started the day I met Vespra. The family name was Sterling, but it might as well have been a sovereign nation. Kaylin and I met in a graduate architecture program. He was brilliant, charming, and carried himself with that specific, unbothered ease of someone who has never once checked a bank account balance. I was a scholarship student, working 2 jobs, living on coffee and ambition. He told me his family was comfortable. That was the first lie, though I don't think he meant it maliciously. To Kaylin, having a private family compound in the Berkshire Mountains and a foundation with his grandmother's name on it was just normal. I met Vespra Sterling on a crisp October afternoon. Kaylin drove us up the winding private road to the estate. The trees were violently orange and gold, framing a stone manor that looked like it had been imported brick by brick from a European countryside. Vespra was waiting on the terrace. She did not wear casual clothes. She wore an aesthetic, a cashmere cape, tailored trousers, a vintage silk scarf. She looked like a woman who had never rushed for anything in her life. Beside her, sitting with the posture of an aristocrat, was Balthazar. Balthazar was an Afghan hound. His coat was a cascade of liquid silver, brushed to such perfection it practically caught the sunlight. Balthazar wasn't just a pet, he was a champion. He had won Best in Breed at shows I had never heard of but was assured were very exclusive. So, Vespra said, extending a hand that felt as cold and delicate as porcelain. This is the girl who has Kaylin so distracted. She didn't look at my face. She looked at my shoes. They were practical, scuffed leather boots. Her gaze traveled up my dark jeans, my plain sweater, and finally settled on my eyes. It was a full-body scan, an appraisal, and I felt the gavel drop immediately. Found wanting. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Sterling," I said. "Vespra," she corrected, her tone implying she was doing me a massive favor. She reached down and stroked Balthazar's long, silken head. "Balthazar is very particular about new people. Let's see if he approves of your energy." She released the hound. Balthazar glided toward me, sniffed my boots, and then immediately turned around and walked back to Vespra, sitting squarely at her feet. "Well," Vespra sighed, a soft, theatrical sound. "He usually senses pedigree. Don't take it personally, Alara. He's just used to a certain standard." That was day 1. The word pedigree was dropped into the conversation within the first 3 minutes. I should have known then. I should have run. But Kaylin squeezed my hand under the patio table, pouring me tea from a silver pot, looking at me with such absolute adoration that I convinced myself his mother's coldness was just a phase. A protective matriarch testing the waters. I told myself I could win her over. I told myself hard work and genuine love were enough. I was 26. I still believed in meritocracies, even emotional ones. 2 years later, Kaylin and I were married. The wedding was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Vespra paid for it, which meant Vespra directed it. Every choice I made was vetoed with a smile and a sigh. My preferred venue was a bit rustic. "Darling, we aren't throwing a barn dance." My dress choice was very sweet for a first attempt, but let's look at the couture lines. By the time I walked down the aisle, I was a guest at my own wedding. I wore a dress Vespera chose, walked down an aisle decorated with flowers Vespera selected, to a reception filled with 300 of Vespera's closest associates. My family, my mother, a retired public school teacher, and my brother, a mechanic, were seated at table 19. It was situated right next to the kitchen swinging doors. Vespera's justification? It's closer to the restrooms, dear. I thought your mother would appreciate not having to walk so far. During the reception, Vespera gave a toast. She stood at the front of the ballroom, a glass of vintage champagne raised. When Kaylin was born, she said, her voice echoing through the microphone, I knew he was meant to carry the Sterling legacy forward. We are a family built on strong foundations, on carefully cultivated excellence. Today, he takes a bride. And while Alara comes from different beginnings, we are hopeful she will adapt to the responsibilities of our name, to the future of the Sterling bloodline. She didn't say, to Kaylin and Alara. She said, to the bloodline. The crowd applauded. My mother looked down at her plate. Kaylin whispered in my ear, she's just old-fashioned. Ignore her. That became Kaylin's mantra. Ignore her. That's just how she is. She means well. You're too sensitive. I learned very quickly that in the Sterling family, Vespera's cruelty was an accepted ecosystem. You didn't fight the weather, you just wore a heavier coat. And Kaylin's sister, Cressida, was the enforcer of this ecosystem. Cressida was 3 years older than Kaylin, married to a hedge fund manager, with twin boys who were already enrolled in a preschool that required an interview. Cressida was a younger, sharper version of Vespera. You really have to forgive Mother, Cressida told me one afternoon over lunch, swirling a fork in her salad. She's just terrified you won't be able to give Kaylin children. You know, with your background and the stress you put yourself under working that little job of yours. My little job is a senior design role at an architectural firm, I said, my grip tightening on my water glass. Right, exactly, Cressida smiled, completely unbothered. Manual labor, essentially. Mother just worries your cortisol levels will ruin your fertility. The Sterling men need heirs. It's a biological imperative. I thought she was being dramatic, a caricature of an elitist snob. But then we started trying to get pregnant. 6 months went by, nothing. A year, still nothing. The monthly cycle became a ticking clock, an agonizing rotation of hope and devastation. Anyone who has struggled with fertility knows the specific, hollow grief of a single pink line on a plastic test. It is a quiet mourning that happens in bathroom stalls and on the edges of bathtubs. It is a lonely, isolating pain. But for me, it wasn't lonely. It was a spectator sport. By year 2, Vespera had made my uterus a topic of public family discourse. She began sending me articles on dietary deficiencies and lower-income upbringings. She mailed me vitamins that smelled like sulfur. During Thanksgiving dinner, in front of 20 extended family members, she loudly asked if I was still drinking tap water, because the heavy metals in municipal water systems are known to cause barrenness. Alara, we really must get you on a reverse osmosis regimen. I looked across the table at Kaylin. He was cutting his turkey. He didn't look up. He didn't defend me. Kaylin and I are consulting with a doctor, I said, my voice shaking slightly. Everything is structurally fine. Doctors, Vespera scoffed softly. They treat the symptom, not the root. The root is the foundation, Alara. You cannot plant a rare orchid in depleted soil and expect it to bloom. Depleted soil. She called me depleted soil in front of 20 people. Under the table, my hands clenched into fists so tight my fingernails cut into my palms. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the antique mahogany table. But I looked at Kaylin, desperately waiting for him to say something. To say, don't speak to my wife like that. Instead, he wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and said, Mom, please, let's just have a nice dinner. Alara is trying her best. Trying her best. Like a child failing a spelling test. Like a charity case. I excused myself, went to the guest bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the floor. I cried until I couldn't breathe. I was 29 years old, a successful architect, a woman who had built a life from nothing, and I was sitting on the marble floor of a mansion feeling utterly, fundamentally broken. The medical tests eventually confirmed that the issue wasn't me. It was unexplained infertility. My numbers were perfect. Kaylin's numbers were perfect. But the biology just wasn't clicking. We started IVF. The hormone injections made me bloated, exhausted, and emotionally fragile. I was bruised across my stomach from the needles. I was balancing a demanding career while feeling like my body was a failed science experiment. Vespera's involvement only escalated. She demanded access to my medical portal. When I refused, she called my clinic directly, trying to use the Sterling name to bypass HIPAA laws. When they threatened to call security on her, she turned her wrath entirely onto me. She began showing up at our house unannounced. She had a key Kaylin had given her for emergencies. She would walk in, usually with Balthazar trailing gracefully behind her, and inspect my kitchen. "Are you still eating dairy?" she would ask, opening my refrigerator. Inflammatory. It creates a hostile environment for an embryo. I read it in a journal. She brought Balthazar into my home like a weapon. The dog was allowed on the white furniture, allowed to knock over my plants, allowed to do whatever he wanted because he was perfect. Balthazar's breeder was meticulous, Vespera told me one afternoon, brushing the dog's coat while I tried to work on a laptop at my kitchen island. 3 generations of pristine health. No genetic anomalies. You can't leave lineage to chance, Alara. You have to curate it. It's such a shame human beings don't have the same rigorous standards for breeding. We let just anyone mix with anyone, and then we wonder why the biology fails. She was looking directly at me when she said it. I closed my laptop. The screen clicked shut, sounding loud in the quiet kitchen. "Vespera, are you comparing my marriage to dog breeding?" She didn't blink. She just offered a serene, chilling smile. "I'm simply observing nature, darling. Don't be so defensive. It raises your blood pressure." I told Kaylin that night. I told him his mother was no longer allowed in our house without permission. I told him the stress was ruining my IVF cycle. He rubbed his temples, looking exhausted. "Alara, she's just desperate for a grandchild. You know how she is. She lacks a filter. Just humor her. We need her support." "We don't need her support," I yelled, my voice cracking. "We have money. We have doctors. What we need is for her to stop treating me like defective livestock." "Don't call my mother names," Kaylin snapped, his voice suddenly sharp. "She paid for this house, Alara. She's paying for half of these IVF rounds. The least you can do is show a little grace." I stared at him. The man I had fallen in love with, the charming grad student in the coffee shop, was entirely gone. In his place was a son who would always choose the path of least resistance when it came to his mother. He wasn't my partner. He was her representative. The next day, our first IVF transfer failed. The grief was a physical weight, a crushing pressure in my chest. I took a week off work. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling an emptiness so profound it echoed. Vespera didn't call to offer condolences. She didn't send flowers. Instead, a week after the failed transfer, I received a text from Cressida. "Mother says the clinic's methods are too commercial. She's consulting with a specialist in holistic ancestral medicine. She has a solution. Be ready." I deleted the text. I didn't care. I was too numb to fight. A month passed. The bruising on my stomach faded. Kaylin and I barely spoke, moving through the house like ghosts on separate tracks. He threw himself into work. I threw myself into silence. Then came yesterday, October 14th. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Kaylin was at the office. I was working from home, reviewing structural blueprints on my monitor. The doorbell rang. I walked to the front door and found a courier standing there. He handed me a wooden box, heavy and intricately carved. There was no return address, just a wax seal with the Sterling family crest. I took it inside, setting it on the kitchen island. I broke the wax seal and opened the lid. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a large, ornate glass jar filled with a dark, coarse herbal mixture. It looked like dried roots, strange leaves, and something that looked almost like crushed bone. Resting on top of the jar was a handwritten note on Vespera's heavy, cream-colored stationery. "Alara, Western medicine has clearly failed you, as I suspected it would given your body's natural limitations. I have procured this blend from a private practitioner in Geneva, who specializes in correcting deep generational biological flaws. It is an ancestral purification tea. You are to brew 2 tablespoons in boiling water every evening. You must drink all of it. Do not mix it with sugar. Do not skip a dose. If you want to carry a Sterling, your body requires extreme intervention. Start tonight. V." I stared at the note. Generational biological flaws. Extreme intervention. My hands began to shake. Not with sadness this time. With a rage so pure, So absolute. It felt cold. I picked up the jar. It was heavy. I unscrewed the lid. The smell that hit me was atrocious, metallic, bitter, and overwhelmingly chemical, masquerading beneath a heavy layer of mint and lavender. It didn't smell like tea. It smelled like soil from a toxic site. I am going to pause here for a moment. If you've ever had a gut feeling that something wasn't just insulting, but actively dangerous, you know the instinct I'm talking about. Your body recognizes a threat before your brain can articulate it. I looked at the jar. I looked at the note. I looked at my phone, contemplating calling Kalen. But I knew what he would say. Just throw it out if you don't want it, Alara. Don't make a big deal out of it. But it was a big deal. As I stood there gripping the glass jar, I heard the sound of a key in the front door. "Hello?" a voice called out. It was Cressida. She walked into the kitchen, wearing tennis whites, holding a leather leash, and at the end of that leash was Balthazar. "Oh, good, you got it," Cressida said, eyeing the wooden box on the island. "Mother asked me to drop by and make sure it arrived. I was just taking Balthazar for his afternoon walk. The housekeeper is out today, so I'm on dog duty." She tied the leash to the heavy handle of the oven door and walked over to the island, peering into the box. "She spent a fortune on this, Alara," Cressida said, her tone sharp. "You better not waste it. You know Mother doesn't take rejection well. She's expecting you to drink it tonight when Kalen gets home. She even told Kalen about it." "She told Kalen?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. "Of course. He agreed you need a different approach. The IVF clearly isn't taking in your environment." Cressida waved a hand dismissively. "Anyway, I have a conference call in 10 minutes. I'm leaving Balthazar here for an hour. Don't let him out of your sight. He missed his lunch and he's fussy." Before I could protest, Cressida checked her Apple Watch, turned on her heel, and walked out the front door, letting it click shut behind her. I was left alone in the kitchen. Just me, the jar of bitter, toxic-smelling tea, and Vespera's prized $60,000 Afghan hound. Balthazar whined, looking up at me with large, liquid eyes. He paced as far as the leash would let him, sniffing the air. He was hungry. Cressida said he missed his lunch. I looked at the dog. I looked at the tea. "Curate the lineage," Vespera had said. "No genetic anomalies." My hands stopped shaking. A very dark, very quiet thought settled into my mind. If this tea was so miraculous, if it was the ultimate cure for biological flaws, surely it was good enough for the most perfect, pedigreed creature in Vespera's life. I walked over to the stove. I filled a pot with water. I turned on the gas. I took the jar of Vespera's miracle tea, and I scooped out not 2 tablespoons, but a massive, heaping cup of the dark, bitter roots. I dumped it into the boiling water. The water immediately turned a violent, murky black. The metallic smell intensified, filling the kitchen with an odor that made my eyes water. I let it boil. I let it steep. Then I strained the dark liquid into a bowl, mixed it with 2 cans of premium wet dog food to mask the scent, and cooled it down with some ice cubes. I untied Balthazar from the oven handle. I set the ceramic bowl on the floor. "Here you go, buddy," I whispered. "Only the best for the bloodline." Balthazar, starving and oblivious, devoured the entire bowl in less than 3 minutes. He licked his chops. I stood leaning against the counter, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes later, the dog collapsed. Balthazar didn't just lie down. His legs gave out from underneath him like the strings of a marionette had been violently severed. He hit the hardwood floor with a heavy, sickening thud. His silver coat splayed out around him, and a low, guttural wheeze escaped his throat. Then, the tremors started. Violent, rhythmic spasms that racked his slender frame, accompanied by a thick, white froth bubbling from his jaw. I froze, the ceramic bowl still resting near my feet. I had wanted to prove a point. I had wanted to show them that Vespera's remedies were garbage, perhaps give the dog a mild upset stomach so I could wave the vet bill in Kalen's face. I had not expected an immediate, catastrophic systemic failure. Watching the magnificent animal convulse on my kitchen floor, a horrifying realization struck me. If this was what the tea did to a 60-pound animal in 20 minutes, what was it meant to do to a woman's internal organs over the course of weeks? Panic is a strange mechanism. For some, it causes paralysis. For others, it creates a terrifying, hyper-focused clarity. I didn't scream. I didn't drop to my knees and weep. I moved with the precision of a surgeon. I grabbed the heavy glass jar of Vespera's roots and shoved it into a plastic grocery bag, sealing it tight. I grabbed the handwritten note "Extreme Intervention" and shoved it into my purse. Then, I dropped to the floor, wrapping my arms around Balthazar's spasming torso. He was incredibly heavy, dead weight shifting unpredictably with every tremor, but adrenaline is a formidable fuel. I dragged him toward the garage, his silver paws slipping against the tiles, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I managed to heave him into the backseat of my SUV, his head lolling dangerously. As I slammed the door shut and raced to the driver's side, my hands were coated in his saliva. I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing faster than the engine. If Cressida came back and found the dog dead, she would claim I murdered him out of jealousy. I needed medical documentation. I needed an unimpeachable witness to what was coursing through this animal's veins. The drive to the emergency veterinary clinic took 9 minutes. I ran 3 red lights, leaning on the horn, my hazard lights flashing wildly. In the rearview mirror, Balthazar's tremors had slowed, replaced by a shallow, ragged panting that sounded like tearing paper. He was dying. The realization sat heavy in my chest, a cold stone of guilt battling with an inferno of rage. I loved animals. I had never wanted to hurt him. He was just a pawn in Vespera's cruel, elitist game, collateral damage in a war he didn't understand. When I skidded into the parking lot of the clinic, I left the car running and burst through the glass doors, screaming for help. The receptionist took one look at my bloodless face and my frantic gestures toward the parking lot, and she didn't ask for paperwork. She hit a button under her desk, and 2 veterinary technicians sprinted out from the back, a stretcher rolling between them. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to become the most important witnesses in the dismantling of the Sterling Empire. They hauled Balthazar onto the stretcher. His eyes were rolled back, the white stark against his silver fur. A tall man in a white coat, Dr. Eris Thorne, according to the embroidered name tag, met us in the treatment bay. What happened? He barked, shining a penlight into the dog's unresponsive pupils. Tachycardia, severe neurological distress. Did he get into antifreeze? Rat poison? I shook my head, my hands trembling as I reached into my bag. No, I said, my voice eerily calm despite the chaos of the room. He ate this. I pulled out the plastic bag containing the glass jar and placed it on the stainless steel counter. Doctor, Thorne frowned, peeling back the plastic. He unscrewed the lid. The moment the metallic, rotting scent hit the air, he physically recoiled. He didn't just grimace. His entire body jerked back as if he had been slapped. He looked from the jar to Balthazar, then to me, his expression darkening into something deeply alarmed. He snapped the lid back on tightly and barked an order to the nurse that made the hair on my arms stand up. Lock down this bay and prep a gastric lavage, now, and get me a hazmat bag for this container. He looked at me with cold, piercing eyes. Where exactly did you get this? I told him. I told him my mother-in-law sent it to me to drink. I told him I fed it to the dog. I didn't hide my culpability, and I didn't sugarcoat the absurdity of the situation. Dr. Thorne stared at me for a long, heavy second, processing the sheer insanity of my confession. Stay in the waiting room, he commanded, his voice tight. Do not leave. I was ushered out into the blindingly white reception area. The adrenaline was beginning to crash, leaving me shaking so violently my teeth rattled. I pulled out my phone. It was time to light the match. I called Kalen first. He answered on the 4th ring, his tone clipped and impatient. Alara, I'm in a meeting. Can this wait? I didn't greet him. I didn't soften the blow. I'm at the emergency vet on Oak Haven Road, I said, staring blankly at a poster about heartworm prevention. Your mother's dog is dying. You need to get here. There was a beat of absolute silence on the line, followed by the sound of a chair scraping violently against a floor. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask what happened. He asked the only question that mattered in his universe. What did you do to my mother's dog? It took Kalen 20 minutes to arrive. He didn't come alone. The sliding glass doors parted, and the entire Sterling tribunal marched in. Vesper was at the forefront, her cashmere cape billowing around her like a storm cloud, her face a mask of absolute fury. Cressida flanked her right, looking frantic, and Kalen was on her left, his face pale and tight with anxiety. They looked like a firing squad. Vespera didn't even stop at the front desk. She marched directly toward me, the heels of her designer boots clicking sharply against the linoleum. Where is he? She demanded, her voice echoing in the quiet waiting room. She didn't look at me like a person. She looked at me like an infestation. Where is Balthazar, and what have you done, you stupid, incompetent girl? Cressida chimed in, pointing a manicured finger at my face. I left him with you for an hour. 1 hour. How could you let him get into something? Did you leave chocolate out? Grapes? I told Mother you were too careless to be trusted with anything of value. I stood up. My knees felt weak, but I locked them. I looked at Kalen, silently begging him to intervene, to stand between me and the venom spitting from his family's mouths. But Kalen was looking at his shoes, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He was shrinking, diminishing himself in the presence of his mother's rage. I didn't leave chocolate out, Cressida, I said, my voice steady, ringing out clearly in the sterile room. I turned my gaze to Vespera. Her eyes were hard, unyielding obsidian. I didn't feed him anything from my pantry. He was hungry. So, I brewed a pot of the special, imported tea you sent me, the one you procured for my biology. I mixed it with his food. The silence that descended on the waiting room was absolute. It was a physical weight, pressing down on all of us. Vespera's mouth opened slightly, a rare break in her immaculate composure. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. Cressida gasped, taking a step back. But it was Kalen's reaction that shattered whatever remained of my marriage. He didn't look horrified at what his mother had sent me. He looked terrified of what I had done to her. Alara, are you insane? He hissed, grabbing my arm. You poisoned a $60,000 show dog with experimental holistic medicine? It wasn't experimental holistic medicine. A deep voice boomed from the hallway. We all turned. Dr. Thorne was standing in the doorway of the treatment bay. He was no longer wearing his white coat. He was wearing heavy, thick rubber gloves, and he looked furious. And it wasn't a mistake, he added, striding into the waiting room. That is the exact moment the automatic sliding glass doors opened again. That is the exact moment the two uniformed police officers walked in, their heavy boots squeaking against the floor, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. Now we are caught up. Now you are sitting in the room with me, watching the Sterling dynasty realize they have finally stepped into a trap they cannot buy their way out of. Vespera, recovering her shock, immediately pivoted into the role of the aggrieved aristocrat. She adjusted her cape and stepped toward the officers. Thank God you're here, she said, her voice dripping with authority. This woman, my daughter-in-law, has maliciously poisoned my champion Afghan hound. She is unstable, deeply resentful, and clearly a danger. I want her arrested immediately for animal cruelty and destruction of property. The older of the two officers, a man with graying temples and a completely unimpressed expression, held up a hand to stop her monologue. He didn't look at me. He looked at Dr. Thorne. You're the one who called it in, Doc? He asked. Doctor? Thorne nodded, his jaw set. I am. But I didn't call you for animal cruelty, officer. He gestured toward Vespera, though his eyes remained fixed on the police. I called you because of what I found in the jar. Vespera scoffed, an elegant, dismissive sound. It was an herbal tea, a fertility blend sourced from Switzerland. If this foolish girl fed it to a dog, of course his system couldn't handle it. Canine biology is entirely different from human biology. Doctor. Thorne took a step closer to Vespera, his towering frame casting a shadow over her. That wasn't tea, Mrs. Sterling, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. I ran a rapid mass spectrometry panel on the sample to find the antidote. There were no herbs in that jar. No chamomile, no red raspberry leaf, no holistic roots. He paused, looking around the room, ensuring every single person heard his next words clearly. The jar was packed with dried, heavily concentrated Aconitum napellus, commonly known as wolfsbane, mixed with high-grade, synthetic misoprostol, and traced with lead acetate. The medical jargon hung in the air, dense and suffocating. Kalen looked confused. Cressida looked blank. But Vespera's eyes darted frantically toward the exit, just for a fraction of a second. She knew exactly what those words meant. I didn't. What does that mean? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Dr. Thorne turned to me, his expression softening with a mixture of profound pity and absolute horror. It means, he said gently, that if you had brewed 2 tablespoons of that mixture and drank it like the note instructed, you wouldn't have just miscarried an embryo. The aconite would have triggered massive cardiac arrhythmia within an hour. The lead acetate would have caused irreversible neurological and renal failure. It wasn't meant to cleanse your system, Alara. He looked back at the police officers. It was a lethal dose, designed to look like a tragic, holistic accident. She wasn't trying to fix your fertility. She was trying to stop your heart. The room spun. The sterile white walls blurred. tilting violently as the sheer magnitude of the betrayal crashed over me. She hadn't just hated me. She hadn't just wanted Kaylin to divorce me. She had calculated my death, packaged it in a beautiful wooden box, and had it hand-delivered to my kitchen. I turned to look at Kaylin. This was it. This was the moment a husband is supposed to tear the world apart to protect his wife. This was the moment he was supposed to scream, to confront the monster standing next to him, to wrap his arms around me and shield me from the nightmare. Instead, Kaylin looked at his mother. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice cracking like a terrified child. "Tell them it's a mistake. Tell them the practitioner in Geneva mixed up the order. Tell them you didn't know." He was feeding her the alibi. In the face of my attempted murder, Kaylin was handing his mother the exact script she needed to escape. He wasn't choosing me. He had never chosen me. I was just the incubator that failed, and now I was an inconvenience to his inheritance. Vespera snatched the lifeline immediately. She stood taller, her aristocratic mask slipping flawlessly back into place. "Of course I didn't know," she snapped indignantly, looking at the police officers. "I am a victim of a fraudulent homeopathic charlatan. I paid 20,000 euros for an ancestral fertility blend. How dare you accuse me of knowing what chemical compounds were inside it? I am an innocent party here. If anything, this just proves how dangerous unregulated medicine is." She smiled, a thin, triumphant curve of her lips. She thought she had won. She thought her wealth, her status, and her quick thinking had erected an impenetrable wall around her. And for a terrifying moment, looking at the hesitant expressions on the officers' faces, I thought she had won too. Plausible deniability is the shield of the elite. How could they prove she knew what was in the jar? She would just sue the non-existent clinic in Geneva, tie the investigation up in red tape for years, and walk away clean. She turned to me, her eyes glittering with malice. "You see, Alara? You've caused all this hysteria over a vendor error. You've killed my beautiful dog for absolutely nothing." But Vespera made one catastrophic miscalculation. She forgot about the note. My hand plunged into my purse. My fingers brushed past my wallet, my keys, and closed around the thick, cream-colored stationery bearing the Sterling family crest. I pulled it out, the paper crinkling sharply in the tense silence of the room. "Officer," I said, my voice cutting through Vespera's smug victory like a blade. "Before she tries to claim ignorance, you should read the instructions she included with the delivery." I held the note out. The older officer stepped forward and took it, unfolding the heavy paper. He pulled a pair of reading glasses from his pocket and scanned the elegant, cursive handwriting. "Western medicine has failed you," the officer read aloud, his tone flat and procedural, draining the poetry out of her malice. "I have procured this blend. Deep, generational biological flaws. Extreme intervention. Do not mix it with sugar. Do not skip a dose." The officer looked up, his eyes narrowing as they locked onto Vespera. "Mrs. Sterling, you claim you thought this was a fertility tea." "Yes," Vespera said, her voice a fraction higher than before, "to help her conceive." "Then why?" the officer asked, tapping the paper. "Does the note specifically say, if you want to carry a Sterling, your body requires extreme intervention?" Aconite and misoprostol are notoriously bitter, hence the instruction not to use sugar to mask the taste. But more importantly, he flipped the paper over. "Did you write this note, ma'am?" "Yes, but I was simply passing along the practitioner's instructions," Vespera insisted, her hands fluttering defensively. "The practitioner in Geneva?" the officer pressed. "Yes. That's very interesting," the officer said, pulling a radio from his belt. "Because Dr. Thorne didn't just test the tea. He swabbed the inside of the jar. The residue isn't from a lab in Geneva. It's industrial-grade herbicide, commonly found in private agricultural estates. Say, for instance, a large compound in the Berkshires." The blood completely vanished from Vespera's face. Cressida let out a sharp, choked noise, taking 3 rapid steps away from her mother, as if proximity to Vespera might suddenly become contagious. Kaylin stared open-mouthed, his breathing shallow and erratic. The illusion of the untouchable Sterling family was shattering in real time, the fragments raining down on the sterile clinic floor. She hadn't ordered it from Switzerland. She had mixed it herself. She had gone into the gardening sheds of her pristine mountain estate, gathered toxic roots, mixed them with chemicals she probably bribed a groundskeeper to acquire, and crafted a poison designed to permanently erase me from her family tree. And she had done it on her own personalized stationery. Hubris is a terrifyingly blind architect. It builds castles on cliffs and never checks the foundation for erosion. Ma'am, the officer said, his hand moving away from his radio and resting squarely on his handcuffs. I'm going to need you to step outside to the cruiser. We have a detective on the way, and I think you're going to want to call your lawyer. You cannot be serious, Vespra hissed, her voice shaking violently now. The composure was entirely gone, replaced by the frantic, panicked desperation of a cornered animal. I am Vespra Sterling. You do not speak to me this way. Kaylin, do something. Call Richard. Call the mayor. Kaylin didn't move. For the first time in his 34 years of life, the golden boy was completely paralyzed. He couldn't fix this. He couldn't throw money at it. He was watching his mother being stripped of her invincibility, and the sight was so alien to him that his brain simply shut down. The officer stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and the matriarch. Mrs. Sterling, I'm not going to ask you twice. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Vespra fought. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't dignified. The woman who had sneered at my scuffed boots and mocked my working-class upbringing threw a physical tantrum in the lobby of an emergency vet clinic. She shrieked as the cold metal cuffs clicked around her delicate wrists. She cursed the officers. She cursed Dr. Thorne, and as they marched her through the sliding glass doors toward the flashing red and blue lights of the cruiser, she twisted her neck to look back at me. You are nothing, she screamed, the sound muffled by the glass but the hatred crystal clear. You will never be a Sterling. You are dirt. I stood perfectly still, watching her being forced into the back of a police car. The red and blue lights washed over her face, turning her pale skin into a strobe light of consequences. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel happy. I felt profoundly, overwhelmingly exhausted. But beneath the exhaustion, a tiny, brilliant spark of freedom flared to life in my chest. She was right. I would never be a Sterling. And thank God for that. With Vespra gone, the waiting room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Cressida was weeping silently into her hands. The reality of the social ruin her family was about to face clearly dawning on her. Kaylin was staring at the spot where his mother had just been standing, his chest heaving. Slowly, he turned his head to look at me. His eyes were wide, pleading, filled with a sickening mixture of fear and manipulation. Alara, he croaked, taking a step toward me, reaching out with trembling hands. Alara, baby, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know she would go that far. We'll fix this. We'll get you a bodyguard. We'll move. We'll just. We have to manage the press. If this gets out, the foundation will be ruined. I looked down at his outstretched hands. The hands that had held mine at the altar. The hands that had done absolutely nothing to shield me for 4 years. He wasn't apologizing for the attempted murder. He was strategizing damage control. He wanted me to stay quiet to protect the brand. Don't touch me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but it stopped him dead in his tracks. I looked up into his eyes, stripping away the love, the history, the hope I had carried for him. I looked at him with the cold, clinical assessment of an architect examining a condemned building. There is no we, Kaylin. Your mother tried to kill me, and your first instinct was to give her an alibi. I was in shock, he cried, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. She's my mother. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to be my husband, I said simply, but you never were. You were just her delegate. I picked up my purse from the waiting room chair. I didn't look at Cressida. I didn't look back at Kaylin. I turned to Dr. Thorne, who was watching the exchange with a grim, respectful silence. Dr. Thorne, I asked, my voice steadying. Is Balthazar going to survive? Doctor, Thorne sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. We pumped his stomach in time. The activated charcoal is absorbing the remaining toxins. It'll be a rough few days, and his kidneys took a hit, but yes, the dog will live. I nodded. Send the bill to Kaylin. And when Balthazar is discharged, make sure he doesn't go back to the Berkshires. I walked toward the sliding glass doors, the cool night air rushing in to meet me. The police cruiser containing Vespra was already pulling out of the parking lot. I stepped out into the darkness, leaving Kaylin Sterling standing alone in the ruins of his own making. But the story doesn't end there. Getting Vespra arrested was only the first domino in a very long, very intricate chain reaction. Arrests do not guarantee convictions when billion-dollar estates are involved. The Sterlings had lawyers on retainer who ate criminal charges for breakfast. They had judges on speed dial. They had media conglomerates in their pockets. By the time I reached my car, my phone was already buzzing. It was an unknown number, but the prefix belonged to a high-end Manhattan law firm. The Sterling machine was already booting up. They were coming for me. They were going to try to paint me as the hysterical, barren daughter-in-law who framed her loving mother-in-law for a tragic accident. I sat in the driver's seat of my SUV, the lingering smell of Balthazar's saliva still clinging to the upholstery. I didn't start the engine. I let the phone ring until it went to voicemail. I needed a plan. I needed to build a fortress they couldn't breach. And to do that, I needed to uncover exactly how deep the rot in the Sterling family went. Because if Vespra was willing to poison me to protect the bloodline, what else had she done to preserve her precious dynasty? I drove until the digital fuel gauge on my dashboard flashed a bright, angry orange. I didn't drive toward the beautiful, sprawling house Kaylin and I shared, the one with the custom vaulted ceilings I had designed myself. That house was a mausoleum now, a monument to a marriage built on a foundation of lies and lethal compliance. Instead, I drove to a nameless concrete motel off the interstate, 30 miles outside the city limits. I parked the car under a flickering fluorescent street lamp, pulled the hood of my jacket over my head, and paid for 3 nights in cash. The clerk behind the plexiglass window didn't ask for identification. He barely even looked at me. That was exactly what I needed. Anonymity. Because by sunrise, the name Elara Sterling was going to be the most hunted commodity in the state's legal circles. The motel room smelled of stale tobacco and industrial bleach. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, the floral bedspread rough beneath my fingertips, and finally let the adrenaline drain out of me. The crash was physically agonizing. My joints ached, my chest felt like it had been compressed in a vice, and my hands resumed their violent trembling. I looked at my phone. The screen was a chaotic mosaic of notifications: 42 missed calls from Kaylin, 12 from Cressida, 7 voicemails from numbers bearing the Manhattan area code of the Sterling family's elite crisis management firm. I didn't listen to a single one. To engage with a crisis manager is to admit there is a negotiation to be had. You do not negotiate with a woman who tried to stop your heart. You dismantle her. I turned the phone off, removed the SIM card, and threw it into the motel room's plastic trash bin. I was entirely cut off. It was a terrifying, profound isolation, but it was also the first time in 4 years I felt entirely safe. The next morning, I bought a prepaid cellular phone from a convenience store across the highway. I sat in my car, nursing a bitter cup of black coffee, and called the only person in the city I knew possessed enough venom and strategic brilliance to take on the Sterling Empire. His name was Silas Vance. I had met him 2 years prior during a commercial architecture project. He was a litigator who had successfully sued a corrupt real estate conglomerate that tried to stiff my firm out of a multi-million-dollar contract. Silas wasn't the kind of lawyer who played golf with judges or attended charity galas. He was the kind of lawyer who found the microscopic cracks in a corporation's armor and drove a sledgehammer into them until the entire structure collapsed. "Vance," he answered on the second ring, his voice a gravelly baritone that sounded perpetually exhausted. "Silas, it's Elara," I said, watching a semi-truck roar past the convenience store. "I need you to represent me, and I need you to do it immediately." There was a pause on the line, the sound of papers shuffling. "Elara, the architect. I thought you married into the Sterling Trust. Why are you calling me from an untraceable burner phone at 7 in the morning?" "Because my mother-in-law tried to poison me with wolfsbane yesterday afternoon, and she is currently sitting in a holding cell while her lawyers try to spin it as a holistic accident," I replied, my voice remarkably steady. "By noon, they are going to come after me. They are going to claim I am insane, that I fabricated the evidence, or that I poisoned her prized dog in a fit of hysterical jealousy." Silas let out a low, sharp whistle. "Wolfsbane? They don't teach that in the standard corporate evasion seminars. Where are you?" An hour later, I was sitting in Silas's office. It was a stark, unpretentious space in a brutalist building downtown, smelling of old paper and bitter espresso. Silas sat across from me, his sleeves rolled up, revealing a map of faded ink on his forearms. He listened in absolute silence as I recounted the previous 24 hours. I told him about the infertility struggles, the psychological warfare, the heavy wooden box, the horrific stench of the tea, and the rapid, terrifying collapse of Balthazar on my kitchen floor. I handed him a photocopy of the handwritten note. He read it twice, his dark eyes scanning Vespra's elegant, sloping cursive. When he looked up, his expression was unreadable. "Dr. Thorne is a highly respected toxicologist," Silas murmured, leaning back in his leather chair. If he documented the rapid mass spectrometry, the physical evidence of the aconite and lead acetate is bulletproof. The residue of the agricultural herbicide on the jar proves she sourced it from the estate, not a Swiss clinic. That's premeditation. It's attempted murder. But? I asked, hearing the unspoken caveat hanging heavily in the dusty air. But, Silas continued, tossing the note onto his desk. This is Vespera Sterling. The district attorney plays tennis with her brother. The judge who will likely preside over the bail hearing has a wing of a hospital named after her family. They will not prosecute this as a murder plot, Alara. They will downgrade it to reckless endangerment. They will claim she was swindled by an online holistic vendor, that she was just a desperate, loving grandmother trying to help you conceive, and that the toxic elements were a tragic manufacturing error. She wrote extreme intervention on the note, I argued, my voice rising in frustration. She told me not to use sugar so I wouldn't taste the poison. A clever defense attorney will argue extreme intervention meant extreme spiritual healing, Silas countered smoothly, playing the devil's advocate. And telling you not to use sugar is standard homeopathic advice. To convict her of attempted murder, we don't just need the weapon. We need undeniable historical proof of her capacity for lethal malice. We need to prove that Vespera Sterling uses poison to solve her problems. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. People who use poison rarely use it only once. It's a coward's weapon. It's clean, it's quiet, and it mimics natural illness. If she was arrogant enough to mix aconite and lead acetate in a jar and have it delivered to your front door, she has done this before. She was too confident. We need to find the trial run. The room went entirely silent. The implications of his words settled over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I thought about the vast, sprawling history of the Sterling family, the untouchable wealth, the sudden, convenient shifts in power. I thought about the portraits hanging in the dark, wood-paneled corridors of the Berkshire estate. Kaylin's father, I whispered, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. Silas raised an eyebrow. Theron Sterling. Died 22 years ago. I remember reading about it in the financial papers when I was still in law school. Tragic loss. He was the visionary behind the Sterling hedge fund. How did he die? I asked, my heart beginning to hammer violently against my ribs. Silas spun around to his computer, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. The rhythmic clacking filled the office as he pulled up archived obituaries and public death records. He squinted at the glowing monitor. He was 42 years old, apparently in excellent health. He collapsed during a private dinner at the Berkshire estate. Silas stopped typing. He slowly turned his chair back to face me, his eyes wide. The official cause of death was listed as sudden, massive cardiac arrhythmia. Cardiac arrhythmia. The exact same symptom Dr. Thorne said the wolfsbane would have caused in me within an hour. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. Theron Sterling didn't die of a tragic, sudden heart attack. He was murdered. Vespera had poisoned her own husband to seize total, uncontested control of the Sterling empire. And because he died at home, surrounded by private, highly paid family physicians, no one ever ordered an autopsy. She buried him, she took the throne, and 22 years later, she tried to use the exact same weapon to eliminate the daughter-in-law who was failing to produce an heir. We need Theron's medical records, I said, my voice shaking with a terrifying electric clarity. We need to find out who signed his death certificate. Alara, those records have been sealed for 2 decades, Silas warned, though a predatory gleam had appeared in his eyes. If we go digging into the death of a billionaire patriarch, the Sterlings won't just try to discredit you, they will try to destroy you. They will freeze your assets, they will ruin your architectural career, and they will make sure you never find a moment of peace in this state again. They already tried to kill me, Silas, I said, looking him dead in the eye. What else could they possibly take from me? He stared at me for a long time, measuring the absolute resolve in my expression. Then a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. All right, let's go hunting. We spent the next 48 hours building the bunker. Silas filed an emergency restraining order against Vespera, Kaylin, and Cressida. He legally separated my finances from Kaylin's, funneling my earnings into an offshore escrow account the Sterling lawyers couldn't touch. We were moving fast, anticipating the tsunami, but the Sterling machine was faster. On Thursday afternoon, the news broke. Vespera made bail. It was an astronomical sum, $5 million, paid in cash without a second thought. The judge, citing her age, her philanthropic contributions, and her lack of prior criminal history, released her on house arrest with an ankle monitor pending the formal indictment. The local news stations aired footage of her walking out of the precinct. She was flanked by men in expensive suits, shielding her face with umbrellas. She looked frail, traumatized, playing the victim with Oscar-worthy precision. The moment I saw the broadcast on the tiny television in my motel room, my burner phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew who it was. I answered, putting the phone to my ear but remaining completely silent. Elara. It was Cressida. Her voice was brittle, trembling with a mixture of suppressed rage and desperate panic. "How did you get this number?" I asked coldly. "We have people who find things," she snapped, the aristocratic veneer cracking. "Listen to me very carefully. You have made a catastrophic mistake. Mother is devastated. The stress of this false accusation is destroying her health. The press is already sniffing around the edges of the story. If this goes to trial, the foundation's stock will plummet." "I'm so sorry her stock portfolio is suffering because she got caught trying to assassinate me," I replied, the sarcasm dripping like acid. "Name your price," Cressida blurted out, abandoning the moral high ground. "Whatever you want. We will buy you out of the marriage. $10 million. Tax-free. A clean divorce, NDA signed by all parties, and you retract the statement to the police. You tell them Dr. Thorne misread the rapid panel, that you accidentally contaminated the jar with gardening supplies. You take the blame for the dog. $10 million. It was a sum of money that could alter the course of a lifetime. It was freedom, wrapped in a golden bow, handed to me on a silver platter. All I had to do was lie. All I had to do was let a murderer walk away to protect the pristine image of the Sterling bloodline. "Cressida," I said softly, staring at the peeling wallpaper of the motel room. "Do you know how your father died?" The line went dead silent. The kind of silence that feels like the air has been sucked out of a room. "What?" she finally whispered. "Cardiac arrhythmia," I said. "Sudden. Unexpected. Just like the symptoms of aconite poisoning. The same poison your mother mixed into a jar of tea for me. Did you ever wonder why there was no autopsy, Cressida? Did you ever wonder why your mother gained sole, unmitigated control of the trust the very next day?" "You are insane," Cressida hissed, but her voice was wavering. The seed was planted. The architectural integrity of her entire worldview was fracturing. "Do not ever speak of my father. I am not going to take your money," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "I am not going to sign an NDA, and I am not going to disappear. Tell Kaylin to get a good divorce lawyer. And tell your mother I hope she enjoys the Berkshires, because it's the last estate she will ever see before she goes to prison." I hung up the phone. I knew the moment I ended that call, the rules of engagement had changed. They weren't going to try to buy me off anymore. They were going to try to silence me permanently. Silas called me 20 minutes later. His tone was urgent, stripped of his usual cynical amusement. "Elara, pack your bags. Get out of that motel. Now." "What happened?" I asked, already shoving my clothes into my duffel bag. "I just got off the phone with an old contact at the district attorney's office. The Sterling lawyers just filed an emergency motion to have you committed for psychiatric evaluation. They are claiming you are experiencing a severe psychotic break due to IVF hormone treatments. They have a doctor, a highly paid family friend, who signed an affidavit stating you exhibited paranoid delusions and homicidal ideation toward their dog. They are sending a private medical transport unit to pick you up under a 72-hour involuntary psychiatric hold." My blood ran cold. It was the perfect, terrifying strategy. If they locked me in a psychiatric ward, anything I said about Vespera, the poison, or Theron's death would be entirely discredited as the ramblings of a madwoman. They would drug me, label me insane, and Vespera would walk free. "How do they know where I am?" I asked, sprinting toward the motel door. "You're driving a car with a GPS system wired into the Sterling family insurance plan, Elara. They tracked your vehicle. Leave the car. Leave everything. Walk out the back of the motel, cross the highway, and go into the diner on the corner. Go to the women's restroom and wait. I am sending someone to get you." I didn't hesitate. I dropped my duffel bag, grabbing only my purse containing the burner phone, my ID, and the copy of Vespera's note. I opened the motel door and slipped out into the humid night air. I didn't look back at my SUV. I ran. I ran across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. In the distance, I could hear the approaching wail of sirens, though whether they belonged to the police or a private medical transport, I didn't wait to find out. I scrambled down an embankment, the tall grass tearing at my jeans, and sprinted across the empty four-lane highway. The neon sign of the diner flickered like a beacon in the darkness. I pushed through the heavy glass doors, ignoring the curious glance of the lone waitress wiping down the counter, and locked myself inside the peeling, fluorescent-lit bathroom. I sat on the edge of the sink, staring at my pale, terrified reflection in the mirror. I was a respected architect. I had a master's degree. I had built skyscrapers. Now, I was a fugitive in a roadside diner bathroom, running from a family that possessed enough wealth to bend reality to their will. 10 minutes later, my burner phone buzzed. A text message from Silas. Black sedan out back. License plate ends in 4X. Get in. I pushed out of the bathroom, slipped through the diner's emergency exit, and found the idling car in the alleyway. I pulled open the back door and threw myself inside. The driver didn't say a word. He just put the car in gear and merged seamlessly into the dark flow of highway traffic, leaving the motel, my car, and my old life far behind in the rearview mirror. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to steady my breathing. A voice spoke from the passenger seat. I jumped, startled. I hadn't realized anyone else was in the car. Silas Vance turned around to face me, his face illuminated by the passing streetlights. "We are going to the one place Vespera Sterling can't touch you. And then, we are going to exhume a body." The shock must have registered clearly on my face because Silas offered a grim, humorless smile. "I told you," he said softly, "we needed Theron Sterling's medical records, but the lawyers have them locked down under attorney-client privilege and medical privacy laws." "So how do we prove he was poisoned?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Aconite degrades," Silas explained, turning back to face the road. "But heavy metals do not." Vespera's special brew was laced with lead acetate. It's an old poisoner's trick to ensure neurological failure if the heart survives the aconite. Lead deposits itself in the bones. It stays there for centuries. If Vespera poisoned her husband 22 years ago using the same recipe she used on you, his skeleton is practically glowing with lead. He looked back at me over his shoulder, his eyes deadly serious. "I found Theron's estranged brother, the one Vespera cut out of the will 2 decades ago. He hates her more than you do. He still has legal standing as next of kin. Tomorrow morning, he is filing a petition to exhume Theron Sterling's remains for a private autopsy." The sheer audacity of the plan took my breath away. We weren't just going to defend against her charges. We were going to rip open the darkest, most buried secret of her dynasty. We were going to prove that the foundation of the Sterling Empire was built on a murdered man's bones. "When Vespera finds out about the exhumation petition," I murmured, staring out the window at the blurred city lights, "she is going to lose her mind." "No," Silas corrected quietly. "When she finds out, she is going to become incredibly dangerous. Cornered royalty doesn't surrender, Alara. They burn the kingdom down." We drove in silence for another hour, winding deep into the rural outskirts of the state. The driver finally pulled onto a dirt road, hidden behind a thick canopy of pine trees, and stopped in front of an old, heavily fortified hunting cabin. "My property," Silas said, unlocking the heavy deadbolt on the front door. "Off the grid, registered under an LLC they can't trace. You stay here. Do not open the door for anyone but me. I'm going back to the city to prepare the filings with Theron's brother." Before he left, Silas handed me a manila envelope. I pulled the architectural blueprints for the Sterling estate in the Berkshires. "If we're going to prove she manufactured the poison there, we need to know where her private gardening sheds are located. You're the architect. Find the blind spots." I spent the night sitting at a rustic wooden table, illuminated by a single kerosene lamp, studying the blueprints of the house I had once desperately wanted to be accepted into. It was poetic, in a dark, twisted way. I was using my profession, the very manual labor Vespera had mocked, to map out the exact coordinates of her downfall. By 3 a.m. I found it. An unlisted, climate-controlled sub-basement beneath the estate's sprawling greenhouse. It wasn't on the public registry. It was a hidden room, perfectly designed for cultivating rare, highly toxic botanicals away from the prying eyes of the estate's groundskeepers. I circled it in thick red marker, the poisoner's den. At 8 a.m., my burner phone rang. It was Silas. "The petition for exhumation is filed," he said, the adrenaline evident in his gravelly voice. "It hit the judge's desk 10 minutes ago. The Sterling lawyers have been notified." "What happened?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "Chaos," Silas laughed, a dark, triumphant sound. "Total, absolute chaos." "But Alara," Listen to me. Kalen just called my office. He didn't call through his lawyers. He called my direct line. My stomach dropped. What does he want? He wants to meet you. In person. Today. Neutral ground. Public place. He says he has something you need to see. Something that changes everything about the tea. And about his mother. It's a trap, I said instantly. They just tried to have me committed to a psychiatric ward. He's trying to lure me out. I know it's a trap, Silas agreed. But he also sent me a highly encrypted file to prove he was serious. I just opened it. What is it? It's an audio recording, Alara, from the night Balthazar was poisoned. It's a recording of a phone call between Kalen and Vespera, and in it, she explicitly admits to knowing the tea was lethal. I stopped breathing. If Kalen had a recording of his mother confessing to the attempted murder, why was he offering it to me? He had spent his entire life protecting her. He had stood in the vet clinic and begged her to lie. Why would he suddenly turn over the smoking gun? What is his condition for giving us the recording? I asked, a sense of deep foreboding washing over me. He wants immunity, Silas said grimly, and he wants you to drop the divorce proceedings. He wants you to come back to him. Immunity. The word sat in my throat like a shard of glass. Kalen wasn't offering a confession out of a sudden surge of morality or a rediscovered love for the woman he had watched his mother try to murder. He was bargaining. He was a sterling to the very marrow of his bones, and sterlings did not give anything away for free. He wanted to trade his mother's head for his own comfort. He wanted to preserve his status, his inheritance, and most sickeningly, the optics of his marriage. He wanted me to return to the manor, to sit at the table, to be the loyal, silent wife who had merely suffered a misunderstanding with her mother-in-law. Tell him no, I said, my voice echoing off the rough-hewn timber walls of the cabin. Tell him I'm not coming back. Not for $10 million, and certainly not for him. Alara, wait! Silas's voice came through the burner phone, sharp and tactical. We need that recording. Without it, Vespera's lawyers will tie the toxicological evidence into knots. They'll argue the aconite was a contaminated batch from a third party. They'll blame the groundskeeper. They'll blame the Swiss clinic. But if we have her voice, if we have her admitting she knew the tea was lethal, it's over. The DA won't be able to ignore it. The Sterling name won't be able to shield her. He wants me to drop the divorce, Silas. He wants me to be his prisoner again. He wants a negotiation, Silas countered. He's terrified. He knows the exhumation petition is the end of the line. If his father's bones show lead and aconite, the Sterling Trust will be dismantled under a cloud of criminal racketeering and murder. He's trying to jump ship before it sinks. Meet him, but don't go alone. I'm sending the car back for you. We'll meet him at the state archives. It's public. It's neutral. And it's a government building. They can't pull any psychiatric hold stunts there without causing a federal scene. 3 hours later, I stood in the grand, echoing foyer of the state archives. The air was cool and smelled of dust and ancient ink. High above, the ceiling was a mosaic of historical triumphs, a silent gallery of men who had built things to last. I felt small beneath the marble arches, my reflection in the polished floors looking ghostly and thin. I wore a plain trench coat, my hair pulled back tightly, my eyes shadowed from days of erratic sleep. Kalen was waiting by a massive statue of a Greek philosopher. He looked like a shadow of the man I had married. His suit was wrinkled, his face sallow, and his eyes were bloodshot. The unbothered ease he had carried his whole life had finally evaporated, replaced by a twitchy, feral desperation. When he saw me, he took a step forward, his lips trembling. Alara, he breathed, reaching out as if to touch my shoulder. I stepped back, my heels clicking sharply on the marble. The recording, Kalen. Nothing else. Can we just talk for a second? He pleaded, his voice cracking. My mother is out of her mind. She's locked herself in the greenhouse. She's burning files, Alara. She's burning Theron's old diaries. I had to wait until she was asleep to get into her safe. I found the burner phone she used to coordinate the delivery. I recorded her talking to her attorney, bragging about how she had cleansed the lineage before and she'd do it again. I felt a cold shiver race down my spine. Cleanse the lineage. She wasn't just talking about me. She was talking about his father. She was talking about Theron. Why are you doing this now? I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disgust. You stood in that vet clinic and fed her an alibi. You watched her get arrested and your only concern was the foundation's stock price. Why the sudden change of heart? Kalen looked away, his jaw working, because she told me I was next. The air in the grand hall seemed to freeze. I stared at him, watching the sheer, naked terror in his eyes. She thinks I'm weak, Kalen whispered, his voice so low I had to lean in to hear him. She thinks I've been compromised by you. She told me last night that if the trust is threatened, she will reset the board. She said a Sterling who can't control his own household is a Sterling who doesn't deserve the name. She's already talking about moving Cressida's sons into the primary inheritance line. He looked back at me, his eyes filled with a sickening, selfish plea. I can't lose it all, Alara. I can't live like you did. I don't know how to be poor. I don't know how to be a commoner. If I give you this recording, you have to promise to help me. You have to tell the court I was a victim too. That she coerced me. That we're still together. You're pathetic, I said, the words falling like stones between us. You aren't scared for me. You aren't even scared for your father's memory. You're just scared of losing your silver spoon. You're willing to put your own mother in the electric chair just to keep your country club membership. I'm trying to survive, he hissed, his face contorting. You have no idea what she's capable of. She killed my father, Alara. I found the old medical reports in the safe, too. The doctor who signed the death certificate? He's been on the Sterling payroll for 20 years. He moved to a private island in the Maldives 6 months after the funeral. It was all planned. It was a corporate coup disguised as a heart attack. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a small silver digital recorder. He held it out, his hand shaking so violently the device rattled. It's all on here. Her admission, the names of the doctors, the groundskeepers who helped her clear the greenhouse sub-basement. Everything. I reached for the recorder, but Kalen pulled it back, his eyes narrowing. The divorce, Alara. Say it. Say you'll drop the filing. Say you'll come home. I looked at the man I had once loved. I thought about the thousands of needles I had stuck into my own stomach for him. I thought about the way he had let his mother call me depleted soil while he ate his turkey. I thought about the lethal tea sitting on my kitchen island. I will never come home, I said, my voice as hard as the marble surrounding us. But if you give me that recorder, I might tell Silas not to include your name in the racketeering indictment. I might let you slink away with whatever scraps of the trust are left after the state is finished with it. That is the only immunity you're ever going to get from me. Kalen stared at me, realizing for the first time that the scholarship girl was gone. He was looking at the woman who had survived his family's poison, and he knew he had no leverage left. Slowly, agonizingly, he placed the recorder in my hand. She's going to kill us both for this, he whispered. No, Kalen, I said, turning away from him. She's only going to kill you. I'm already dead to her. I walked out of the state archives, the weight of the recorder in my pocket feeling like a live grenade. I didn't look back to see if he was following. I didn't care. I got into the waiting sedan and barked at the driver to get me to Silas's office. When I arrived, Silas was on the phone, his face grim. He hung up the moment he saw me. The judge just signed the exhumation order, he said, skipping any greeting. But there's a problem. Vespra's legal team filed an emergency stay, claiming religious desecration. They're trying to block the forensic team from entering the cemetery. I have something better, I said, slamming the silver recorder onto his desk. Silas looked at the device, then at me. He didn't ask questions. He plugged the recorder into his computer and hit play. The audio was grainy, filled with the ambient hum of a high-end HVAC system, but Vespra's voice was unmistakable. It was cold, melodic, and terrifyingly rational. The girl is a nuisance, Kalen. A weed in a pristine garden. I did what was necessary for the Sterling name, just as I did when your father became a liability. He was going to sell the hedge fund, did you know that? He was going to pivot to socially responsible investing. He was going to dilute the power I spent a lifetime helping him build. I couldn't let him destroy the foundation. I cleared the path once and I will clear it again. If Alara lives, she will be a stain on our history. If she dies, she is a tragic footnote. You will choose the right side of history, Kalen, or you will find yourself on the outside looking in. The recording ended with the sharp clinical click of a phone being hung up. Silas sat back, his face pale. My God. She didn't just admit to poisoning you. She admitted to Theron. It's a full confession to a 20-year-old homicide. Is it enough? I asked, my heart hammering. It's more than enough, Silas said, his fingers already flying across his keyboard. I'm sending this to the DA's personal secure line. I'm also sending it to the state police. This isn't house arrest anymore. This is a tactical extraction. They'll arrest her within the hour. But as Silas typed, the kerosene-sharp smell of something burning seemed to drift through my mind. I thought about what Kalen had said. She's locked herself in the greenhouse. She's burning files. Silas, wait, I said, grabbing his arm. The greenhouse sub-basement. The poisoner's den. If the police just march up the front driveway, she'll have time to destroy the physical evidence. She'll set the whole place on fire. We need the actual chemical residue from Theron's murder. We need the aconite she used to mix my tea. Alara, the police will handle it, Silas argued. No, they won't. They'll follow protocol. They'll wait for a warrant for the sub-basement. They'll announce themselves. Vespra doesn't follow protocol. She follows the Sterling imperative. She will burn that estate to the ground before she lets a forensic team find her lab. I looked at the blueprints I had studied in the cabin. I saw the blind spot again. The ventilation shaft that led from the old stone well on the north edge of the property directly into the climate-controlled sub-basement. I know how to get in, I said, and I know where she keeps the records. I spent 4 years being her shadow, Silas. I know where she hides the things she's proud of. And she is very, very proud of her poisons. You are not going back there, Silas said, standing up. It's suicide. It's justice, I countered. And I'm the only one who can navigate that house in the dark. I didn't wait for his approval. I knew Silas would call the police, and I knew they would be right behind me. But I also knew that Vespra Sterling wouldn't surrender to a badge. She would only surrender to the person she had underestimated most. I took the car. I told the driver I had Silas's permission. He didn't question me. We raced back toward the Berkshires, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows across the highway. The orange light felt ominous, like a warning, but I felt a strange, cold peace. When we reached the perimeter of the Sterling estate, I told the driver to stop a mile from the gate. I slipped out of the car, carrying a heavy-duty flashlight and my architectural kit. The woods were dense and silent, the ground covered in a thick carpet of damp leaves that muffled my footsteps. I knew these woods. I had walked them 100 times while Vespra mocked my common love for nature. I found the old stone well. It was a relic of the original farmhouse that had stood on the land in the 19th century, now overgrown with ivy and hidden behind a cluster of hemlocks. I pulled away the rotting wooden cover, the smell of damp earth and moss rushing up to meet me. Beneath the well's lip was the iron grate Kaelin had once told me led to the estate's auxiliary drainage. But the blueprints had told a different story. It was a ventilation intake for the sub-basement. I unscrewed the grate, my fingers numb from the cold. I slid into the narrow, concrete shaft, the space so tight I could barely breathe. I lowered myself down, inch by inch, the darkness absolute. My heart was a frantic bird in my ribs, but my mind was a grid. Turn left at the 10-foot mark. Drop 3 feet. Follow the hum of the climate control unit. I landed on a cold metal floor. I clicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through a thick haze of chemical-scented air. I was in the den. It was more sophisticated than I had imagined. It wasn't a dusty cellar. It was a high-end laboratory. Rows of glass vials were organized alphabetically in teak cabinets. Bunsen burners, sophisticated filtration systems, and a massive industrial dehydrator occupied the center of the room. On the far wall, there was a glass-fronted refrigerator. Inside, sitting in neat rows, were bundles of purple flowers. Aconitum napellus, wolfsbane. I moved to the desk in the corner. It was a beautiful antique roll-top desk, out of place in the sterile lab. I pulled at the drawers. Most were empty, but the bottom drawer had a false back. I used a drafting compass from my kit to pry it open. Inside was a leather-bound ledger. I opened it. The first page was dated April 1998. Theron is becoming difficult, the entry read in Vespra's elegant hand. His obsession with ethics is a cancer on the fund. I have begun the purification. 10 milligrams aconite in his nightly decoction. He complains of a tingling in his fingers. I told him he was overworking. My breath hitched. It was a diary of a murder. She had documented her husband's death with the same clinical detachment she used to plan a seating chart. I flipped through the pages, my eyes stinging. Entry after entry, year after year. She had used the den to eliminate business rivals, to quiet whistleblowers, and finally, to correct me. October 12th, the final entry read. Alara is a biological failure. I have prepared the Genevan blend. It is a mercy, really. Kaelin will mourn, but he will heal. The Sterling name cannot be tethered to a scholarship girl's shallow roots. The purification begins on Tuesday. It's a beautiful book, isn't it? The voice came from the shadows at the top of the stairs. I whirled around, my flashlight beam swinging wildly. Vespera was standing on the bottom step. She wasn't wearing her cashmere cape. She was wearing a simple dark silk robe, and in her hand, she held a small silver-plated pistol. Her eyes were wide, glowing with a terrifying fractured light. The ankle monitor on her leg blinked a steady, rhythmic green. "You really are quite talented, Alara," she said, her voice a soft, deadly purr. "To find your way in here? Most people don't see the world in layers. They just see the surface. You saw the structure. I suppose I should have respected that." "It's over, Vespera," I said, clutching the ledger to my chest. Kaylin gave us the recording. "The police are on their way. They know about Theron. They know about the tea." Vespera let out a soft tinkling laugh. "Kaylin, my sweet, weak boy. He always did have a penchant for the losing side. He thinks he can save himself by betraying me. He doesn't realize that without me, there is no sterling trust. He is burning his own house down to stay warm for an hour." She took a step toward me, the pistol leveled at my heart. "And the police? They're at the front gate, darling. My security is. Engaging them. It will take them 20 minutes to reach this greenhouse. In 20 minutes, I can do a great deal of clearing." "You won't kill me," I said, my voice shaking. "If I die here, it's a crime scene. You can't hide it." "Actually," Vespera said, her smile widening into something truly monstrous, "I've already rigged the gas lines. The sub-basement is filled with pressurized methane. When I pull this trigger, the entire greenhouse will vaporize. A tragic accident. A grieving mother-in-law and her distraught daughter-in-law, both lost in a holistic fire. The press will find it poetically devastating." She raised the gun, her finger tightening on the trigger. "Wait!" I shouted. "Balthazar. He's alive, Vespera. Dr. Thorne saved him." Vespera froze. For the first time, a flicker of genuine human emotion crossed her face. He lived? "Yes, but he's not a champion anymore. He's just a dog who will never go back to you." The distraction lasted only a second, but it was enough. I threw my architectural kit at her, the heavy metal case hitting her arm with a sickening crack. The gun fired, the bullet whizzing past my ear and shattering a row of glass vials behind me. The sound was deafening in the small room. I dived for the ventilation shaft, my heart screaming. Behind me, I heard Vespera shriek in rage. I scrambled into the concrete tunnel, the ledger tucked into the waistband of my jeans. I climbed with a strength I didn't know I possessed, my fingernails tearing as I clawed at the walls. I burst out of the well, gasping for air just as the night sky erupted. The explosion was a physical wall of heat. The greenhouse shattered, a million shards of glass raining down like diamonds in the firelight. A column of flame roared into the sky, illuminating the Berkshire Mountains for miles. I fell onto the damp grass, shielding my face from the embers. I looked back at the manor. The fire was spreading to the main house, the stone walls glowing orange. Sirens filled the air. Blue and red lights finally crested the hill, hundreds of them. I lay there, clutching the leather-bound ledger, watching the sterling legacy burn. The police found me 20 minutes later. They didn't find Vespera. Not yet. I was taken to the hospital, treated for smoke inhalation and minor burns. Silas was there before I was even admitted to a room. He sat by my bed, his face gray with relief. "The ledger?" he asked. I pointed to the plastic evidence bag on the bedside table. "Every murder, every rival, every drop of aconite. It's all in there." Silas nodded. "The forensic team is already at the house. They found the remains in the sub-basement. They're identifying her now." "It's over, Alara. It was over." But as I lay in the hospital bed, watching the sun rise over a world that no longer contained Vespera Sterling, I realized that the payoff wasn't the fire. It wasn't even the ledger. The payoff came 2 days later, when the door to my hospital room opened and Kaylin walked in. He looked ruined. His inheritance was frozen, the Sterling Trust was being dismantled by a federal task force, and his mother's name was being dragged through the mud as the most prolific poisoner in the state's history. He walked to the edge of my bed, his hands trembling. "Alara," he said, his voice a ghost of itself. "The lawyers. They say if you testify for me, if you tell them I didn't know, I might be able to keep the apartment in the city. I might be able to salvage enough to live." I looked at him. I saw the handsome grad student. I saw the husband who stood by while I was poisoned. And I saw the coward who was still trying to use me as a shield. "Kaylin," I said, my voice quiet and absolute. Do you remember what your mother called me? He flinched. Alara, please. She called me depleted soil, I said, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across my face. But she was wrong. Soil isn't depleted because it's weak. It's depleted because it's been overworked by people who don't know how to nurture it. I leaned forward, looking into his hollow eyes. I'm not testifying for you, Kaylin. I'm giving the DA the recording of our meeting at the archives, the one where you tried to bargain with your mother's confession. I'm telling them you knew about Theron for years. I'm telling them you were the one who gave her the key to my house. You can't prove that, he shrieked. The sterling entitlement flared one last time. I don't have to prove it, I said. The ledger does. She kept the receipts, Kaylin. She kept every receipt, including the one for the key she bought you. Kaylin fell to his knees beside my bed, sobbing. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't feel pity. I simply watched him. A stranger who once shared my bed. Get out, I said. He stood up, his face a mask of snot and tears, and walked out of the room, followed by the two detectives who had been waiting in the hallway. I sat alone in the quiet hospital room. My phone, my new permanent phone, buzzed. It was a message from Dr. Thorne. Balthazar was picked up by a breed-specific rescue today. He's going to a farm in Vermont. No titles, no pedigree, just a couch and a yard. He's going to be just fine. I closed my eyes. I thought about the Afghan hound running in a field of green, his silver coat caught in the wind. I thought about my own life, a blank blueprint waiting to be drawn. I was 31 years old. I had no husband. I had no mother-in-law. I had no pedigree. I had something better. I had a pulse. And for the first time in 4 years, my heart beat with a rhythm that was entirely my own. The aftermath of the explosion in the Berkshires didn't bring the immediate silence I had expected. Instead, it was like the shattering of a massive, pressurized glass vessel. The shards flew far and wide, cutting into everything the Sterling name had ever touched. While the fires were still being extinguished, the legal machine, the headless beast of the Sterling Trust, tried one final, desperate maneuver to bury me. Even with Vesper's remains being identified and the greenhouse sub-basement being processed as a hazardous waste site, their Manhattan lawyers filed for an immediate injunction to seize the ledger I had recovered. They claimed it was proprietary corporate intelligence. They claimed I was a thief. They even tried to suggest that I had set the fire myself to cover up my theft of family secrets. But Silas Vance had been preparing for this. He didn't just have the ledger, he had the toxicology reports, the recording from Kaylin, and a growing list of former Sterling employees who were suddenly very willing to speak now that the Queen was dead. The trial of the century never quite made it to a courtroom because the evidence was so overwhelming it became a corporate autopsy. The ledger wasn't just a diary of murder. It was a map of 20 years of systemic corruption. Vespera hadn't just used aconite on her family. She had used the threat of it and the wealth it secured to bribe officials, silence journalists, and manipulate the very stock market that Kaylin had been so terrified of losing. The forensic exhumation of Theron Sterling was the final nail. The bone analysis didn't just show lead. It showed a concentration of arsenic and aconite metabolites that proved he had been slowly, methodically poisoned over the course of 18 months. He hadn't died of a heart attack. He had been marinated in toxins until his organs simply gave up. When that report was leaked to the press, the Sterling Foundation's board of directors resigned within the hour. The stock plummeted. The holdings were liquidated to pay for the massive federal racketeering fines, and the name Sterling became a shorthand for dynastic madness. Kaylin didn't escape the fallout. He had hoped his silver digital recorder would buy him a clean slate, but he had waited too long. The ledger revealed that Kaylin had been aware of the sub-basement lab for years. He hadn't known the specifics of the poison, but he had helped his mother launder the payments to the doctors who signed the fraudulent death certificates. He wasn't just a victim of her manipulation. He was an accessory to the preservation of her crimes. He was arrested 4 months after the fire. I watched his arrest on a television in a small, quiet apartment in the city, a place he didn't know about, a place Kaylin Sterling could never track. I watched him being led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, his face a mask of disbelief. He still looked like he expected someone to step in and fix it for him. He still looked like he was waiting for his mother to come and tell the officers they had made a mistake. Cressida was the only one who reached out in the end. She came to my new studio nearly a year later. I had spent that time rebuilding my life, far from the shadows of the Berkshire Mountains. I was Alara Vaughn again. I had taken my maiden name back, stripping away the Sterling title like a layer of poisoned skin. I was working on a project for a low-income housing initiative, designing buildings that were meant to be sturdy, safe, and full of light, the exact opposite of the Sterling Manor. Cressida looked haggard. The untouchable tennis pro aesthetic had been replaced by a weary, hollow-eyed reality. "They're seizing the main estate," she told me, sitting on a wooden stool in my studio, surrounded by blueprints and cedar models. "The state is turning it into a protected forest. They're tearing down the house. They say the ground beneath the greenhouse is so contaminated with heavy metals, it'll never be safe for residential use again." "Good," I said, not looking up from my work. "It should be returned to the earth. It was never a home anyway. It was a fortress." Cressida looked at me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Kalen wants to see you. He's at the correctional facility in upstate. He says he has things he needs to say. About the tea. About how sorry he is." I finally looked at her, my pencil resting on the paper. I felt a profound sense of distance, as if I were looking at a person through the wrong end of a telescope. "Tell Kalen that I already heard everything he has to say on the night he asked for immunity. Tell him I don't need his apologies. I have his mother's ledger. That was the only honest conversation I ever had with a Sterling." "I'm pregnant, Alara," Cressida whispered, her voice cracking. "With a girl." I felt a sharp, familiar pang in my chest, but it wasn't the bitter grief of the infertility years. It was a cold, clear warning. I looked at Cressida's stomach, then back at her face. "Then do her a favor, Cressida. Don't tell her she has a pedigree. Don't tell her she has a legacy. Just tell her she has a mother who decided to stop the cycle. If you raise her in that shadow, you're just brewing the tea for her, 1 tablespoon at a time." Cressida left shortly after that. I never saw her again. I heard later that she moved to the West Coast, changed her name, and disappeared into a quiet, suburban life. I hope for the sake of her daughter that she stayed there. The most incredible part of the story, the one that still feels like a trick of the light, happened 6 months after the legal battles ended. I had been living a quiet, healthy life. No Sterling stress, no Vespra lurking in my kitchen, no Kalen telling me I was too sensitive. I was eating well, sleeping through the night, and focusing on the tactile joy of my work. I went to my regular doctor for a checkup, expecting the usual talk about my unexplained infertility and options for adoption or egg donation. But the blood work came back different. I was pregnant. Nature is a brilliant, stubborn architect. It turned out my body wasn't flawed, and my soil wasn't depleted. It had simply been under a state of siege. The high cortisol levels Kalen and Vespra had mocked, the subtle, constant stress of living in a hostile environment, it had been the ultimate contraceptive. Once the threat was removed, once the poisoners were gone and the house was burned, my body did exactly what it had been trying to do for 4 years. I gave birth to a son in the middle of a warm July. I named him Leo. He didn't have a Sterling middle name. He didn't have a trust fund waiting for him. But he had a mother who knew exactly what went into the tea he would one day drink. I kept Balthazar, or Czar, as I called him now. The state had tried to seize him as a Sterling asset, but Dr. Thorne and Silas had fought to have him condemned as a medical liability due to the poisoning. I adopted him for $1. He lived out his days on a small farm I bought on the coast. He didn't have to win any more shows. He didn't have to have a pristine coat. He spent his afternoons chasing seagulls and sleeping on a porch that smelled of salt and sun. He lived to be 14, a long life for an Afghan hound, and when he finally passed, he did so in his sleep, with his head on my lap, knowing he was loved for being a dog, not a trophy. I still have Vespra's note, not the original, the police kept that for the archives, but a photocopy Silas made for me. I keep it in the bottom drawer of my desk, beneath my architectural seal. I don't look at it often, but sometimes, when a client asks me to design something imposing or exclusive, I take it out. I read the words extreme intervention and I remind myself that the only architecture that matters is the kind that lets people breathe. The Sterling dynasty is gone. The manor is a memory, the greenhouse is a patch of wild grass, and the sub-basement is filled with concrete. The purification Vespra wanted finally happened, but not the way she planned. The earth took it back. I am Alara Vaughn. I am 35 years old. I am an architect of buildings, and of my own fate. My bloodline isn't silver, and my constitution isn't thin. I am made of the things that survived the fire. I am made of the truth that couldn't be poisoned. And as I sit on my porch, watching my son play in the dirt, the healthy, vibrant, honest dirt of our own land, I pick up a cup of tea. It's simple peppermint. It's sweet, it's warm, and I drink every single drop.